So we're back. Smarter Markets is here at IETA's North America Climate Summit 2025. Happy to be joined by Guy Turner, Managing Director and Head of MSCI Carbon Markets. Great to have you here.
Great
It's been a little while.
Yeah.
It's a great opportunity to catch up at conferences like this one. And so first thing I wanted to ask, I first got to know you when you were at Trove, which you founded, and now that was taken over by MSCI, I think you said 2 years ago. What have you been working on? What's of interest to you in the markets right now?
I think continuing the journey we were on before, we've always had a very broad platform serving investors, traders, project developers, corporates, and we've just continued to build that out. So we still have the very broad platform, but we've got deeper into certain areas like ratings, particular aspects of ratings, so the project level analysis we do, but also the country level analysis as well, which is going to get more important as Article 6 starts to play a more important role. We've been working with MSCI colleagues on new indexes, sort of benchmark and price indexes. And so, a whole host of exciting stuff.
And, in terms of the data that you're able to provide to the market, what do you find people are seeing as the most valuable right now? Like, what are people coming to you for?
Yeah, so we've had this broad platform, policy analysis, prices, forecasts, project, corporate level data, the people buying the carbon credits, the ratings. So we've always had this very broad offering. And I've often asked over the years, come on, there must be one or two areas that clients really want. And the answer really is they access everything. And it's the integrated sort of analysis that you can do when you can thread country level analysis to corporate sort of decarbonization strategies, to carbon offset purchases, the prices, the quality, and then the forecasts. And I think it's that holistic view that the clients need, rather than just sort of like buying one and looking at one aspect, because it is a complicated space the carbon credit market, operates in. And you do have to have 360-degree vision to understand, where you are, what's coming down the pipe, and in the sort of the side winds that are going to sort of buffet you.
And it feels like we've got it's only going to get more complicated, right? We have a lot more compliance schemes launching globally around the world. How are you thinking about integrating that into the work you're doing at MSCI?
Yeah, we've been sort of talking about this for the last year or so, and sort of what I used to call a sort of unilateral world is moving to a multipolar carbon world, where the old sort of bastions of demand in rich worlds in Europe and North America, the big corporates, they still exist. But we've now got 15 jurisdictions around the world that are allowing the use of carbon credits to offset taxes as compliance schemes, everything from Singapore, Australia, Colombia, South Africa, etc. And these collectively add up to a sizable chunk, or will do in 5 or so years' time. The challenge for an investor and project developer is you're now spread across more parts of the world, and you have to understand each of those jurisdictions. And what we're trying to do is, and what we're doing is bringing that all together in a very accessible sort of single place. So you can say, how, if I've got a project, can I sell it to South Africa? Can I sell it to Colombia? Can I sell it to California? If so, what are the dynamics? What are the eligibility requirements? How much am I going to be able to, trade it for? So it just becomes a bit more extra work for the market, but the opportunity is there.
And I know this morning you were on a panel talking about the markets growing globally. And I wanted to ask you, what was the idea or the message you wanted to bring to that panel?
I think I'm a glass half full person, and I've supported environmental markets, in particular climate and carbon markets, for, dare I say, nearly 2 decades. And I still feel very strongly that there was a really good business case and sort of societal case for that. And if you look at where the developed world is now and the headwinds that we're facing politically, net zero has become a pejorative word in the UK and in Europe, in certain parts of the world. It's getting harder to push through, aggressive decarbonization policies because of the costs. There's complaints in Europe about the cost of electricity, the cost of energy, the effects on industrial competitiveness, and governments are reacting to that. So if we still want to have some strong climate ambition, we can still do that and achieve that if we use the international markets and we use the lowest cost forms of abatement elsewhere in the world, rather than just those that are limited to where we happen to live and, the boundaries of our country.
I was curious, when you're on that panel, how did people receive that idea? Like what other ideas are people talking about that you found engaging?
Well, there's generally a nodding of heads when you talk at it like that, because there's not a lot to disagree with. There was talk about Article 6 and the importance of maintaining integrity within the Article 6 system. I think there's this perception that once a country signs a corresponding adjustment, releases the credits for use by another sort of Paris entity, the job has been done. But as we all know, the individual countries' NDCs are very different. Some are very tight and ambitious, some are a bit looser, some are partial, some are intensity-based, some are absolute-based. And now we're making adjustments to these moving targets, assuming that the end result is equivalent. And we're saying, no, it isn't. One country's corresponding adjustment is not the same as another country's corresponding adjustment. And I think there was general agreement in that. And, there's still a lot of work to be done under Article 6.4 with the PACM and whether or not nature-based projects are going to be allowed in or not. So there's still some concerns about whether or not the rules that are being created are going to be helpful. But the basic principles, I think everyone agrees on.
And I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the word integrity, and that obviously a lot of people focus on that. But you've spent a long time tracking integrity, rating projects, looking at how different projects are priced. I was curious, just like, what's your sense of the state of integrity in the market and how it's been changing over time with the quality of projects?
So it's a great question, and it's sort of the $6 million question. First of all, there is a strong and proven relationship between the price you get in the market and the quality of your project. So buyers are discerning. Even more than that, investors are discerning. So if you look at the capital flows going into carbon projects now, a lot of them in the nature sector, they're only targeting projects which they know are going to have a high quality outcome. Nobody wants to invest risk capital into a project and have a low rating. That's not what investors. However, what is really interesting is so when we look at the projects that have been developed, say 3 years ago, and the ones that are being developed now, and there's a big change. I haven't got the stats, but have a look at our sort of state of integrity report. There's been a sea change in the quality of projects being invested in and built. What hasn't changed as much, there's been a change, but is nowhere near as marked, is the quality of credits being retired in the market month on month, quarter on quarter. And it's been improving, but not as much. And the reason is that there's still a price correlation between integrity and price. So in certain parts of the world or certain companies, they're being driven by price-conscious purchase decisions and therefore retiring those cheaper credits and hoping they can get away with the communication side of it. They higher ambition corporates are saying, no, we're willing to pay those higher prices for the higher quality, and we're going to stand behind our public sort of disclosures and claims. So there's still a breadth of companies wanting to use carbon offsets. That will change. That will continue to change. The ones that sort of the low cost ones will probably get sort of squeezed out of the market, and their communications people may say, look, we don't want to run the risk of buying low quality offsets, and we'll be left with just the good stuff left. But it will be more expensive.
And I want to come back to a phrase you used earlier of being in a multipolar world. So we're sitting in New York. President Trump was here yesterday. The U.S. is obviously pulled out of the Paris Agreement. You mentioned some of the troubles in the U.K., but we have compliance markets moving forward in much of the rest of the world. How do you think about how people who are active in trying to develop carbon markets and take climate action, how do you make your way through this multipolar world? What do you need to understand about it to be successful?
Well, as I said earlier, it is getting more distributed around the world. And I think the US policies on not just climate, but everything else is driving and accelerating that process because of the isolationism that's creeping in. And as a result, the middle-income countries around the world are taking up more responsibilities. They're benefiting to some degree economically. In the UK, our government has said if the US doesn't want to employ the brightest people anymore with $100,000, visa fees, we'll have them. Thank you very much. And that's not just sort of a UK issue. It's what I'm seeing is middle-income countries in Central America, South America, Middle East, Asia, is these countries now starting to grow into the sort of the bracket of where there's enough wealthy middle class people saying that we want to take responsibility. And then you get a positive ratchet effect. So Indonesia has introduced a carbon tax, a modest one of $2 a ton. Singapore is a much higher one, much richer. There are other carbon taxes being built. And when governments sort of start to introduce these taxes on carbon and climate at low levels, there's a sort of an addiction that starts to kick in because we actually can use this money in a beneficial ways. And I think that then precipitates a sort of positive sort of there's a domino effect of increasing prices, increasing taxes, carbon taxes, and having something to say on the global stage as well. So you're seeing a lot in ASEAN and in the Asian markets. A lot of those countries are vying for prominence in creating carbon exchanges, putting in place sort of ambitious climate policies, I think it's part of a helpful aspect of a multipolar world.
And when you think ahead to the next year, is there something that you see that folks like those at this conference, participants in carbon markets from different backgrounds, is there something that we could be doing, we could be accomplishing over the next year that you would see as being really important to making better progress on the climate and developing more efficient and useful carbon markets?
When we do all of our modeling, and it's pretty obvious that the Paris targets are 2030. That's still 4 years away. Maybe there's an electoral cycle that a lot of governments is going to face in between now and then. So there's a reason why governments have sort of and corporates, a lot of net zero or sort of low carbon targets have interim targets at 2030. The Corsia scheme first compliance sort of deadline is end of 2027. So there's a number of deadlines that are sort of looming, and carbon credit purchases are going to be part of those solutions. I would encourage all of those entities to bring them forward. Now, that might be a smart strategy while the prices are where they are, because the price curves that we're predicting are going to go up. But I think it would encourage more liquidity. It would encourage more activity. It would smooth out peaks and troughs in pricing, and generally give confidence. There's a learning by doing sort of mantra that is, I think, very, very relevant. And the more we do and the more we transact, rather than talk about transacting, the better we get at it. And we work out what works and what doesn't work. And we've seen that in many sort of situations. Europe has led the charge on the EU ETS, and they fell down a few crevices sort of early on, but they learned very quickly. And I would encourage more sort of doing and bringing forward those 2030 targets to 2026, 2027, and start to sort of invest and transact and make a smoother transition rather than leaving it all to sort of December 2029.
Well, more doing, less talking, but certainly glad that you had time to stop by and talk with us today. Really appreciate catching up with you, Guy.
Great to talk to you.